A lot of people really like birds. Bird watching is popular. Not a lot of people are big fans of gulls. They're annoying to a lot of people, particularly because they're really good at observing us and the food resources that are around humans. But when you stop and observe and pay attention, there's so much intricacy in gulls. California gulls in particular, having to breed in these inland arid lakes, winter on the Pacific coast, learning the best way to survive, and just that in itself is incredible. My name is Christy Nelson, and I work with Point Blue Conservation Science, and I monitor the California gull colony out here at Mono Lake. California's gull is a bird unlike any other. Anything that can survive this highly caustic, salty lake water is an amazing animal. So Point Blue's research on the California gulls is a really unique project, and one that we have a 35-year data set and counting. One of the major goals of the research is to see what can we learn about the relationships of the gull colony and the health of the gull population, and how that in turn is representing conditions within the lake. We want gulls to be an indicator of ecosystem health. Historically, the species of California gulls nested entirely in inland arid lakes, like Great Salt Lake in Utah and the Mono Lake, because of the food resources primarily, and that there's predator-free nesting islands to nest on. When the California gulls come here in the spring, there's not a lot of food out here. Once the lake warms up, the alkali flies, which are lining the shoreline right now by the millions, they're one of the primary food sources for the California gull. The technique the gulls mostly use is to open their mouth as wide as they can and run as quickly as they can, and it's pretty entertaining to watch. The other major food resource that the gulls are eating out here are these brine shrimps. So they're just taking the shrimp that happen to be on the surface. Chicks are starting to hatch at the end of May, and so then these little young gulls, fairly soon after they fledge from the nesting islands, they actually migrate back to the coast. And the California gulls can live to be 20 or even 30 years old. Being colonial means that there's relatively few of these big colonies. That makes each individual colony really crucially important for not just the local population, but even the species as a whole. So I've been working out on the Mono Lake gull colony since 2005, where we're counting the nests and monitoring the chick production. The islands are just covered in gulls, nesting in these incredibly dense colonies. And when we're out there working, you've got to kind of yell to each other because of the din of the birds. The population size varies quite a bit. We've seen as few as 27,000 gulls nesting, as many as 65,000 gulls. And even though it's a pretty simple ecosystem, we see a lot of complex relationships in the bird populations. We found that when the lake is highly stratified between freshwater and salty water, those were the conditions where the chick production was very low. And what happens is when there's a really big snowpack and then it melts and it brings in lots of fresh water dumping into the lake. I mean, that's good because it raises the lake level of Mono Lake, which is helping to protect the nesting islands. But when a lot of fresh water comes in contact with the salty water, instead of mixing, it sits on top. That interrupts the nutrient cycling within the lake. And I think the shrimp might literally be too small to be a good food source for the amount of energy that it takes to forage on all those little shrimp. When this study began in 1983, the future of the gull colony was uncertain because at that point, the city of Los Angeles was still diverting a lot of water. Legislation was put in place to protect Mono Lake that resulted in certain caps on the amount of water that Los Angeles could safely take. And those limits were created in 1994, where we didn't expect climate change. And so what we're seeing now is that California is heating up. We're having these extreme droughts. And so as the volume of the lake shrinks, these islands become connected to the mainland. And because they're nesting on the ground, if a coyote were to get out onto these colonies, they can just decimate the population. But today we see other issues with salinity, not just from the lake declining to dangerously low levels, Conditions are right where there's very high levels of runoff coming into the extra salty water where the fresh water sits on top. Those salinity conditions depress the lake ecosystem, depress the nutrient cycling that ultimately have negative effects on the gulls and other birds. I feel somewhat optimistic about the success and the future for the gulls, but I think that will take support and science from us humans. Seeing them forage out on this lake that can be so incredibly inhospitable. They're a part of a vibrant Mono Lake ecosystem, and Mono Lake wouldn't be the same without them.
Hey there, this is Luke Groskin, video producer for Science Friday. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, then you'll love our other science documentaries. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, then join our growing community of supporters on Patreon.